Ah, hello, Miss Kepner. Oh, thank you. Okay. Brought my microphone this one old. Nah, I was turned away. Miss Kepner. Yes. The city got destroyed. Huh? Mr. Doherty, the palace choked. But Queen's Park Rangers won, so I was happy about that. All right. What am I talking about? What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, it's February. Another month? Why is this month significant? Why is the month of February significant? Why is it important? Huh? Yes? Huh? Ash Wednesday? I know Easter's early this year, right? But is Ash Wednesday this month? It is this month? Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting to know. Yes. Why else might also the beginning of Ramadan? Yes. Huh? Black History Month. Yes. Yes. No. Um, yeah, and then so to honor these months, as you might know, I like to talk about people in a Catholic context, because we are a Catholic institution founded by Catholic nuns. I talk about Catholics, American Catholics, in this case, Black American Catholics, and give my own little twist as a theologian. Those Black American Catholics, or whatever, could be women for Women's History Month or Native Americans. But those people are on their way to sainthood in the Catholic Church. Like the Hall of Fame, basically. Basically, what sainthood is. It's kind of like being entered into the church's Hall of Fame. You're a good example of a Christian. Anyways, how do you become a saint? Well, I'm glad you asked, Ms. Boaggio. There are 4 levels, Mr. Lodis. If a person dies, it's a very holy person who's recognized by a lot of people as a good person, possibly a saint, and there's some evidence for it in the person's life, and maybe even some unusual things happened, i.e., miracles during the person's life. Well, they can open an investigation, and the person starts the first stage, which is servant of God. The person is recognized as a particularly holy person and is given the title servant of God. And that begins the investigation. They start reading person left writings. They read all their writings. They interview people who knew the person just to make sure the person wasn't a phony. Or the person may have just been a good person, but not a saint. Nothing necessarily very special. Well, we're all special, right? God don't make junk. But if they do go through the writings, they find that the person, we might have something here. This wasn't quite a special holy person. Then the person can be venerated and honored in the church, and so they become venerable. The church confirms the veneration possible of the person. Then you're waiting for miracles. You're waiting for unusual events that kind of give a supernatural proof that the church is on the right track and trying to or wanting to declare this person a saint. You got one miracle, one unusual event that cannot be explained naturally, scientifically. Then the person becomes blessed, they declare blessed. And then you wait for another miracle of another miracle. Okay, 2 miracles. The church kind of is like, okay, God's telling us something, and we can move forward and declare the person an actual saint. But I mean, throughout all of this, it doesn't mean the person wasn't a saint already. The person, is probably if the person was a saint, then he or she's already in heaven with God. It's not like God keeps them at the door until the Catholic Church finally, the Pope finally decides, oh, we'll declare this person a saint. And it doesn't mean that just because someone is never declared a saint, they weren't actually one. because I mean it's a lengthy process, it's an expensive process. You need a postulator who's going to promote your cause, and you know I don't know about you, but I don't have anybody to do that for me. I'm my own postulator. So before I die, you know, I could print up some holy cards, stack of holy cards, and start handing them out. You know, I don't know what kind of, I don't know, is this a good position? A hand up kind of in a blessing, little smile maybe. I don't know if I want a halo or if I want like lights coming out of the top of my head. I'll have to see. You know, just start passing it out. You know, got to get it, start promoting, self-promotion. You know, got to get the votes to get in the Hall of Fame. St. Matthew Dunn. Yes. All right, back on task, Ms. Kepner. So this lady, this beautiful woman, black American woman, black American Catholic woman, Mother Mary Lang, or her name was Elizabeth Clarice Lang, but her name is sister was Mother Mary. Born in around 1784, died in 1882. Born in Cuba, 1784, 1882, circa, all right, because I wasn't there. Maybe from Haiti. Her parents may have been Haitian, but she was born in Cuba, and then eventually in the early 1800s, her family and she emigrated in some form or manner. I don't know. To the United States, and you know, became a naturalized citizen. Right? Hold on a second. You're sending me stupid things. Oh, leave me alone. My doctor wants feedback. You know, I'll give you feedback. Stop sending me text messages asking for feedback. In the middle of my job. Anyways, so they made their way to Maryland, where there was that's one of the large Catholic populations. It started as a Catholic colony, as a gift of land for Catholics to colonize. So yeah, they went up to Baltimore, Maryland, so in this neck of the woods, kind of, and that's where they settled. And she taught children from the Caribbean in her home. Yeah, I mean, that's a nice way of putting that, you know, they wouldn't let the black kids in the white schools. So, you know, the black community, you know, people of color, as we say nowadays, you know, had to fend for themselves. And, you know, if you wanted your children taught, you know, you teach them yourself. So she would gather up all the black kids and other kids, black kids, brown kids, whatever, to her home. And a local priest, a French priest, Father James Joubert, noticed this and asked her to start a school for black girls. Okay. Which she wanted to do because one of her desires was to start a religious order of nuns, a sister. She wanted to be a sister. Why couldn't? Well, at the time, in the colonies, I'm not sure if at the time that there were any actual religious orders of sisters. I'm pretty sure like up in Quebec where the French were for a while. But I'm not sure if in the American colonies. Nevertheless, you know, it probably would have been a cold day in hell before they let her in, you know, for obvious reasons. Yes, you know, she wasn't white. So start her own religious order, which she did in 1829, the Oblate Sisters of Providence. The word oblate is just a fancy word for offering, an offering. So they're offering their lives, Ms. Don't tell me. Ms. Voles? Yeah. They're offering their lives to God. So it's an oblation. So they're the Oblate Sisters of God, Providence, the care of God, under the care of God. So the Oblate Sisters of Providence, which was as you can also imagine, it had to be all black because, you know, there just was no mixing back then, even then. Segregation, even though it wasn't maybe the law in some places, it was, you know, culturally there. But it gives her group the credit, the Oblate Sisters of Providence, of being the first group of black religious in the country, of black, in this case, black women, Catholic religious sisters. So that's interesting. and obviously known as a very good and holy woman. There's an actual picture of her with her little rosary. God bless you, Mother. In the habit of her group. And the group still exists today. They're still around. And so she died. And now she was a servant of God for the longest time. And then finally in 2023, Pope Francis made her venerable. So now she's Venerable Mary Lang. And I ask for Venerable Mary Lang's prayers for us in this class. All right, where are we here? World religions. Okay, finish up on the Catholic Church. There's a little bit more to do, I hope. And then we'll start with Hinduism. All right. Please keep up with the readings. So you should have done some of the readings, I would imagine, by now on Hinduism. Textbook maybe, and maybe some other stuff. Nevertheless, keep an eye on the readings, please. I talked about that. We were Vatican II. Where are we going here? I have a lot of stuff on the PowerPoint that I'm not going to go over, and I won't quiz you on. Don't worry about it. Just the important things that I've mentioned. We were talking about Lumen Gentium. Okay, God bless you. Move on to Ad Gentes, another one of our readings, a decree on the missionary activity of the church. So the church is missionary. The church has, not all religions are missionary religions. Okay, Hinduism is not a missionary religion. They don't really send people out to proclaim Hinduism. You know, in fact, it would make really no sense to be a Hindu is to be an Indian. Indian in India, Indian, not like a Native American Indian. Okay. So it's a cultural thing. Whereas other Judaism, same thing. Whereas with certain religions like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, there is this missionary impulse to go out and proclaim their message. Okay? And so Christianity is a go out religion, a missionary religion, missio, mitto, to send, Latin to send. So that's all it means. Missionary activity. Okay? I'll read this. God desires all men and women to be saved. That's God's wish. That's why the church is missionary. That's why it's like, knocking on the doors, hello, I'm Elder Johnson from Provo, Utah. Would you like to hear about another testament of Jesus Christ? I love the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints. Beautiful people. I always smile when I see the missionaries. I mean, imagine putting 2 years of your life on on hold to just proclaim your beliefs to people, and knock on doors and talk to people, learn another language. It takes a lot of guts, I think. A lot of commitment. Don't see Catholics doing it. I don't even see the Catholic Church asking Catholics to do it. Do they? Do we? Do it? Would we? What? Nevertheless, all must be converted to Jesus. So conversion just means changing your life or changing your mind. The church wants people to change their minds, not change their cultures or change their languages, not become, Portuguese or German or Irish. Although that's kind of like how people interpreted it during the colonial period, so a lot of Christians in India have Portuguese last names, and they're totally Indian, ethnically Indian, but they're Christians, and they, were converted by the Portuguese. When the Portuguese had their empire in parts of India under their control, people would just, I guess, out of, they were grateful for the becoming Christians, so out of devotion, they take the name of some Portuguese person, get rid of their Indian name, native Indian name, or maybe keep it but not use it as much. Converted to belief in Jesus and be incorporated into his community. Okay? And I think also that's kind of natural for any religion. You'll see with just every religion we're studying, there's a community. Even what you might consider the most basic religion, like primitive religion. You're not supposed to call it primitive religion now. Call it like traditional religions or something else. Tribal religions. Okay, fine, maybe. there's still the tribe. There's still a group, even if it's just a bunch of guys and ladies sitting around a campfire telling their mythologies and their stories and whatever, going through their life cycle rituals. Um, there really isn't a religion of one. There might be somebody on the internet, but I'd say he or she is the exception that proves the rule. Even at its most basic level, there's some kind of corporate entity, some body that you're part of, a group. For Christianity, this is done by dunking in water. And when we get to Judaism, I'll show you a woman and her baby being dunked in water. It was a Jewish practice. Jesus was Jewish man. He just incorporated it into his own religious movement for people to show that they believe in him. He wanted them to dunk themselves in water to show that they were his followers. Okay? Nevertheless, ad gentes, this decree, now we looked at Lumen Gentium, right, Ms. Voles, which is a dogmatic constitution, highest level, yes? A decree is the next level. Okay, so you got a dogmatic constitution, or a constitution, Ms. Harrison, a decree, which is not on the same level of authority. There might be teachings involved, but usually decrees are used when the church is going to make changes to her law or the discipline of the church. And then the last one we'll get to when we get to Nostra Aetate is a declaration. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is at the next lowest level, but it reaffirms what Lumen Gentium said in 16 and 17, that God knows how to lead people to faith in him. He knows what he wants. I heard this one time. I was watching a debate. Matt Dillahunty. Anyone ever hear of Matt Dillahunty? Atheist debater. Well, anyways. He's all over YouTube. If you're looking for atheist Christian debates, you'll eventually stumble over Matt Dillahunty. Seems like a nice guy. But I was watching one debate with this guy Trent Horn, who's a Catholic apologist and debater. They're talking about, I think it was the resurrection. Is the resurrection rational or logical or whatever? I don't know. Yeah. But Dillahunty's an atheist. He said something really wise. Because Trent was like, what would it take? What evidence would you need to believe in God? Because any evidence I bring up or arguments, you seem to find something wrong with them. And Matt was like, well, if there is a God, which I don't believe there is, but if there is a God, then he would know what I need. And whatever it is, he just hasn't chosen to reveal it to me yet. He said more than that, but I'm paraphrasing. And I was listening, I'm like, that's really wise. I always felt like when Jesus met the lawyer and, said, what is the greatest commandment of the law? And the lawyer answered, to love God and love your neighbor. Jesus said, Jesus was surprised. He got it right. And he said, you are not far from the reign of God, the rule of God. Yes. And nobody asked Jesus any more questions. That shocked me that this guy would, impress Jesus. But yeah, it was wise. God knows what you need. And why do some people, how can they feel certain that God has kind of led them to a belief in him? And why are others so sure that there isn't? I don't know. And if there is a God, I assume he knows, God knows. But, I'm not him. I'm not his advisor. I'm not the conciliary to God, So he's not letting me know why. But in ways known to him, that's the belief of faith. Yes, people can be saved. But these are possibilities, okay? We're really searching about truth. Everyone is in relationship to truth, whether a person is a Christian, non-Christian, a theist, a believer in a God, or not a theist. We want our minds to agree with reality. Okay, we would like, because if they don't agree with reality, that doesn't seem to be a good thing, and then we start dumping drugs down the person's throat, to make them better, if the mind isn't working the way it's supposed to be, if it's not in accord with reality. All right. If your eyes keep seeing everything backwards or upside down, there's a problem there. That's not what reality is, and you got to treat it right, or you might want to treat it. Maybe. Eh, uh, Who knows nowadays? But truth, to be faithful, treue, in Old English, to be faithful. It's a faithful representation of how the world is. Doesn't mean it actually is how the world is, Miss Perfield, because the world is really weird. And as we push forward into physics and stuff, we start finding out that the world is very much weirder than our conceptions are. So how do we live in a world like that? How do you function in a world like that if you know what you know? That most stuff is just space, There is, you think you're material and physical, but really you're not. Your atoms are mostly space, emptiness, okay? Why don't you fall through things? Why don't you meld into the desk or the chair that you're sitting in or your clothes? Just become one big jumble of atoms, and other weird stuff. Well, our minds conform with the reality that they create for us. Otherwise, I think we probably we'd lose our minds pretty quickly if we really understood how the world really is, really is, just much weirder than our brains create for us, because the brain creates the reality before we kind of understand it. Okay, it's almost like a hologram in a way. Apparently, the way the brain works is that it takes all the information, the sensory information coming in, Ms. Perez, and then it constructs what it thinks is out there, and that's what you're dealing with and reasoning about and thinking about. Now we come to a declaration. That's at the lowest level. A declaration is kind of like a policy statement, the church's version of a policy statement. There's a new development, and we need to say something about it, so we're going to say something about it. Yeah. Doesn't mean that it's set in stone. Our opinions could change, or our views could change in the future, so don't necessarily hold us to this. I had one priest friend describe it as like a trial balloon. Okay, you send something up the flagpole and see who salutes, as the old saying goes. But this is an important document, even though it's at the lowest level. The Declaration on the Relation of the Church to Non-Christian Religions is important for a number of reasons, not just for what it teaches and says, but because it's the first time, at least for the Catholic Church, that it had ever issued any kind of statement on other religions in its 2,000-year history. Okay, so that makes it unique in that sense. The church's relationship, and it's not on the religions per se, but on their relationship to the church and salvation. What is the plan of God of other religions and his ultimate plan of salvation in his son Jesus, if you're a Christian and believe that? Okay, you have to acknowledge that not everyone believes in Jesus. People believe in other stuff. Okay, it's there. It's a reality, yes? Yeah? It's how the world seems to be. It's truthful. I bump into other people all the time, who worship other gods or believe in other spirits or don't believe in gods or spirits. Okay. What's the relationship to the message of the church? Well, I'm not going to, hopefully you've read the whole document, but anyways, I'm not going to go into the whole document. But they open with a little summary of, human beings ask questions. We ask, like, what does it mean to be human? What's the purpose of life? What does it mean to be good? Why does life suck? Okay. Well, you can address these questions philosophically. I don't think you necessarily need to create a religion to address these questions, Ms. Harrison. Although, Ms. Hancock, I am in the process of creating my own religion, yes? My cult, yes. Based on the veneration of me, which will be shown, Mr. Oriole, by what? How will you show your veneration of me? Cult. Well, you better remember, sir. Huh? No, not prayer cards, sir. Shame on you. Shame on you. Well, you're not a member of my cult. So you're not under my can't punish them and give them something stuff for you. What are you supposed to do to honor me? How are you going to honor me, Mr. Sinsky? I mean, what's the proper way to honor Dr. Dunn in the cult of Dunn? Mr. Sinsky, you be kicked out of the compound. Indian food, right, Miss Cassiano? Bring me Indian food. And I also think I'm going to make it a requirement that everyone has to own a cat. Everyone has to have a cat. Yes. I think so. Yeah. So you don't need a religion for that. I mean, I guess you could create religion. So I mean, okay, that's these are not religious studies scholars. These are bishops talking about why they think people have religions. Okay, answer some of the ultimate questions, ultimate reality, yes. And the church rejects nothing that can be is truthful or even good in those religions. You know, any teachings that are true, any practices that are true. You know, honoring your parents. Find that across all sorts of cultures and religions. You know, cultures and then religions affirm it. You know, treat your parents well. You know, which makes sense, I think, as being grateful to those who gave you life and raised you, raised me as well. Um, yeah, that's truthful. That's also a good thing. That's a holy thing. That's a good practice. Am I supposed to reject it because it's some Taoist who says this to me, or that the person's a Muslim? Well, yeah, it's good to honor your parents, but you know, Ali, you're still going to burn in hell without Jesus. Honor your parents all you want. That's all well and good, but and not steal, tell the truth. But you know what, Bob? You're lost without Jesus. Well, okay, you know, maybe you are lost without Jesus in principle. But there, and this is a major statement, even though it comes in a declaration. It's a major recognition because, you know, as I told you about Vatican II, before this, there was a very negative view of the outside world, and people kind of held that view. It didn't matter that, you know, Gandhi was a good man or a righteous man, or Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, or Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, who seems to have been a good man, a wise man. Doesn't mean I agree with everything they believed in. They seem to do good things and believe good things. They seem to act well towards people. Um, Nevertheless, they weren't Christians, so there was something evil about them. You had to look for like the shadows somewhere. There's something bad about them somewhere. No smoke without fire, because they didn't accept Christ. So they're of course, they're in hell, Miss Garrity. You know, they all have to be in hell. But they were bad people. You know, just the kind of negative view. You know, this is a more optimistic and positive view that recognize that there's truthfulness and holiness amongst other religions, not just in Christianity. And we respect that. We respect those religions and the people, even their ways of conduct, which don't necessarily agree with ours, though differ in many particulars. Okay, like idol worship. All right, you know, we're not down with the idol worship, but you can recognize that it shows a search and it shows a desire for the human person for ultimate reality, to seek ultimate reality, maybe in a way that, you know, the church cannot accept, would tell me as a Christian is sinful to pursue, and it would be because I know better. But for somebody else in that religion, not trying to justify idol worship, I'm just saying that in their context, you know, we can look more optimistically at it as it's showing their search for God in a way. And it might lead them to some sort of truth, that there is an ultimate reality. There is something to search for, which is a positive thing. That at least there's something to search for. There's something more than this, us. However, the church proclaims and must always proclaim Jesus is still the way. He is the way, the pathway, the Tao, you might say, Mr. Sneed. He is the true Tao.
He is the Dharma of dharmas. He is the truth and the life. We find the fullness of human flourishing in believing in him. And our reconciliation, this is the work of reconciliation, trying to bring back the world to the way God wants it to be. All right. All right, and then these are some statements from Pope Paul VI. I'll move on from this. It adds nothing new. Don't worry about it. If you want to read it, you can read the PowerPoint if you're interested in asking questions, but the information is just basically repetitive of what Vatican II said. So. All right, so maybe I should just bring it quickly all together. Okay, just very quickly summarize. So, always the acknowledgement that God has saved humanity in his son, Jesus Christ. Jesus is the ultimate, the only, or the most truthful revelation of ultimate reality for all human beings, not just for Christians. And we're called to accept that, because if we want to accept what reality truly is, and Jesus is representing that, then I want to accept that, whatever it might mean, even if I don't understand everything it might mean about Jesus and who Jesus is. I might start out by just thinking Jesus is a good, holy man, but maybe there's something attractive about him that gets me to reading about his story, and maybe talking to other Christians. What do you think Jesus was, and whatever. And it leads into a relationship. Religion, relationship, yes? People want a relationship. They want to interact, Mr. Doherty, with the ultimate reality. God comes to interact with us. In the case of other human religions, it's us creating our own ways to interact with the sacred. We're creating the tools to interact and enter into the sacred. From the perspective of Christianity, and also Judaism, because Christianity comes out of Judaism, the sacred comes, it's the sacred that's active. The ultimate reality comes to us and lives amongst us, Jesus, the Son of God. Okay. But that does not mean that people cannot know the truth. We have minds to think with. That people cannot lead moral lives. We have hearts to make choices, good choices and bad choices. That's part of being human. There's nothing Christian about using your brain and listening to your heart. There's nothing necessarily even religious about that. An atheist seeks the truth and wants to do good, I think. Someone who doesn't believe in a spiritual, who's a materialist, who doesn't believe in a supernatural world at all. All right. Oh, wait. So I think that's a fine summary. If anything's unclear, ask me, interrupt me. Hinduism, yes, Hinduism. Mother India, Hinduism, one of the oldest world religions on the planet. If you're a believing Hindu, it's the oldest. It's not even a question. It's as old as the cosmos. Hinduism is the religion of the cosmos, of the universe. Okay? So if you have a problem with Christians always talking about Jesus, well, Hindus go beyond even Jesus to the formation of the universe. That's where Hinduism comes from. It simply comes out of the universe. But from what we can tell, historically, it's been around for 5,000 plus years. So it's a very old religious culture. And with Judaism, Hinduism is one of the most ancient of the world's living religions. Living religions, because it's still being lived and practiced by people. So Hinduism and then Judaism. And it's centered in India. And there's a reason for that. There's a map of India. There's a reason for that. Because Hindu basically means India actually means a river that was once part of India. Now it's in Pakistan. But anyways, Mother India, to be part of, if India is your mother, you were born there, or your ancestors are from India, you're Indian, no matter where you are on the planet, India is always your mother. And so, of course, you need to worship your mother. India, you worship the according to the religion of your motherland. According to recent statistics, 2015, so that's over 10 years ago, there are just over 1 billion Hindus in the world, around 1 billion. All right. I think it's hard to get, for some reason, it's hard to get accurate numbers, but that's as good as I could get. So around 1 billion. All right. I think it's 700 million in the country of India, and then you have millions of others throughout the world. Most Hindus live in India, the country of Nepal, here above in the Himalayas, and in, where else did I say Nepal? Oh, Bangladesh. Well, Bangladesh is mostly Muslim, though, but Bangladesh, okay. Nepal is an interesting country because it used to be the only Hindu monarchy on the planet. They had a king, and the official religion was Hinduism, but no more. They had a communist insurgency, and which was fighting to overthrow the monarchy. And then one of the princes shot up all the royal family and killed most of them in a massacre. Well, that kind of helped the communists out. And they kind of, I guess they knew the monarchy was over, so they've kind of transitioned now into, I guess, a constitutional monarchy or some kind of democracy, but it's not really, it's not the only Hindu kingdom in the world anymore, which was kind of a cool claim to fame, but whatever. Officially Hindu kingdom. Officially, India is a secular state. There's no, Hinduism is not the state religion of India, even though most people follow it or believe in it in some way. And where does the word come from? The word comes from Sanskrit. Remember our old friend Sanskrit from the word Dharma? This river called Sindhu, which simply means river in Sanskrit, but it was, river, I guess. Sindhu for the river, this great river called the Indus River. You can see here the Indus River that flows down here. And yeah, so it's like the Indus River is kind of like it's a redundancy, the river. But anyways, the Sindhu, which then in Old Iranian, which is you can't see Persia or Iran. The country of Iran is over here, or ancient Persia, and whatchamacallit, Iranian's like an ancient version of Persian. Sindhu became Hindu. They dropped the S, or the S became like an H sound, Hindu. And then when Europeans came over and asked, what are these people called? They're the people of the Indus River, the Hindus, people who live around the Sindhu, this big river, the river, just they were saying. But the river dwellers, I guess you could say, it becomes Hindu. So Sindhu becomes Hindu in another language, which enters into English as Hindu. But really, it means basically India. That's where we get the name of India itself, from this river. Which, yes, I know, one of those weird quirks of just history. The river ain't in India anymore. It is kind of up here, but this whole region is in dispute, and they're fighting with Pakistan over it. So, Pakistanis think it's part of Pakistan. Indians think it's part of India. But nevertheless, most of the river is in the country of Pakistan, which used to be part of India, but broke off. And then in the early 50s or late 1940s, I forget exactly when. Anyways. So it's really a foreign word, actually. It's not the name that Hindus give to their religion, which we'll get to in a moment. It was imposed on them by, really the Muslims, again, the Islamic conquerors who came through Iran and Pakistan, modern-day Pakistan. That's the word. They took this word from Hindu and then applied it to the river dwellers on the Indus River. And then, as I said, it came into the technical jargon of Europeans when they encountered Indians. But the Hindus, quote unquote, that's not what they call themselves. They call their religion the eternal Dharma, the eternal law, Sanatana Dharma. It is the law of the universe, of ultimate reality. As I said, it goes back to the very genesis, the emergence of the cosmos is where their religion comes out of. It's part of, it's entangled, one might say, Mr. Frank, with the very atoms and quarks and leptons and whatever, anti-particles of the universe. Take that, Buddhists. You know? Yes, Mr. Lodis, I'm right there with you. And Hinduism is a word, it's a concept, but and we say the Hindu religion, but it's really an umbrella term, Mr. Zelke, for a lot of religious beliefs. Okay? They all kind of share some commonalities because they all come from the Indian subcontinent, India, okay, the region of India. And they all share some characteristics of belief, you know, the belief in many gods, polytheism, reincarnation, that, you know, life is a cycle of death and rebirth, liberation from that cycle of death and rebirth. What else? Sometimes caste system. You know, there are different levels to the society. Some are on the top, some are on the bottom. What else can I say? Oh, an acceptance. Oh, that's a big one. An acceptance of the Vedas. These various books called the Vedas, which we'll learn about later, that are sacred writings that you accept. That if you don't accept them, you're just not a Hindu. You're another religion. You know, but if you do accept them, they're a Hindu. But it's very diverse religion. Okay, so it can be very confusing and overwhelming. The only thing that really unites all these different varieties of Hinduism is, again, Mother India. Mother India. Okay? So it's not so much a belief, you know, a belief system as this guy Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who was one of the presidents of India. Hinduism is more of a culture than a creed. It's the Indian way of life. To be Hindu is to be Indian. It's not to be Christian or Muslim or Jain. It's to be Indian. Okay. You say, well, wait a second. I thought India was a secular state. You know, with no official religion. Yeah, that's why things can get a little bit dicey in India. Sometimes it's not always clear where the religion is supposed to end in the society, and so some groups like Christians can get kind of pushed around a little bit. So that's a continuing issue if you read Indian online news sources and stuff like that. And Muslims complain as well of being treated as second-class citizens because they're not Hindu. So it's, you know, we can make it into a creed, into a belief system, but it's hard with Hinduism because there is so much diversity. There are some things that we can identify about it. All right. Now, a lot of this, so a lot of this archaeological or historical stuff, I can pass over. I just want to emphasize what I think is maybe what would be relevant to us now. But, you know, India has, you know, very ancient culture. Archaeologists have been digging stuff up in India and mostly Pakistan along the Indus River, where the civilization emerged, okay, a long, long time ago. And there's a picture of, was that Mohenjo-Daro, which seems to have been a big city and stuff. You know, they've dug up some stuff, some things that appear to be writing, but are indecipherable at this point. They think they're writing, but we're not sure if they're writing or more symbols and picture writing. Have you ever taken Encountering Sacred Writings with me? Yeah. So you know about pictographs and stuff like that. Just not sure that it's meant to be actual words. Okay? So, but anyways, whatever it is, we can't decipher it. But this is an interesting thing because it's an image of some creature, probably a god, possibly, with three faces, presumably a fourth that we can't see, facing away from us, sitting in what looks like a yoga position, you know, the lotus position of yoga, okay? This is an image of, we don't know. It's called the Pashupati seal. It was found at this ancient site, Mohenjo-daro. Dates to a long, long time ago, as you can see from the dates, back 2,000, almost 3,000, 4,000 years ago. But what is it? Again, we don't know. Okay, it looks kind of like some of the versions of the Hindu gods. Shiva, maybe? Lord of the beasts, Lord of the animals. Okay, animals seem to be surrounding it. There's a tiger I can make out. What I think is a rhinoceros, an elephant. Okay. Could it be the god Brahma? Brahma has 4 faces. Okay. Or could it just be an example of someone in the ancient world practicing yoga, and it's an attestation of the ancientness of yoga? Don't know. I mean, because people could have patterned things on earlier stuff, so you don't know. Someone could have made Brahma, the god Brahma, to look like this image or a similar type of idea. And this has nothing to do with Brahma at all, but someone copied it, right? Appropriated it. Don't know, but it's interesting. It doesn't add much to our knowledge of Hinduism, but it shows that, I think, at least yoga. I think the yoga connection is very interesting. I think that there's some connection there. For our purposes, I'm going to focus on the Aryans because, I don't know, the Nazis are, the word Nazi is still blowing through the wind, isn't it? And Adolf Hitler and fascism. Okay. So I'll try to connect it up with current events. All right. Because people don't know what Aryan is, and it has nothing to do with neo-Nazis or fascism, at least not originally. Okay, it has to do with a theory about India. Right? There's the belief that around 1500 BC, a group of humans migrated into northern India. You remember we talked about Max Mueller and his ideas about these languages that were united from India all the way over to Western Europe, the Indo-European language family. Okay? And that's true. That's undeniable. There's clearly a linkage between all these languages, various languages that have spread across the globe from India to Europe. And this dark green area is where scholars think that the Indo-European languages probably emerged or came about in southern Russia, the Caucasus Mountains region. Hence, whites are called Caucasians. If you ever wonder why whites are called Caucasian, he's a white person, it's because of this really, really outdated old theory that the Indo-Europeans came from the Caucasus Mountains and then spread out. So the world was divided into 3 races: the Caucasoid, right, and the Caucasus Mountains, the Negroid, Africans, and then the Mongoloid, who were the Asians from Mongolia, northern China. All right, but no one says this anymore. It's an algebra, but still we use some of the language. Like we don't look at the cops and say, "Whoa, we have a Mongoloid person who's running down the street." But they will say, "Well, there's a Caucasian man with a hatchet who's running naked down the street." Call for backup. I'm calling for backup. So we'll still kind of use that type of very outdated language based on outdated theories. Okay. But the language theory, this seems to be legitimate. Okay, there does seem to have been a group of human beings who lived in this region of southern Russia, in the steppes, like big fields that go on forever, and started migrating and moving. Some of them went into the west, into Europe. Some of them went east, down into Iran, and into northern India. And they brought their languages with them, and their culture and their beliefs. And they're called Aryans. The ones that go to India, northern India, are called Aryans. Why? Because in the writings which they left, the Vedas, which, as I said, we'll talk about later, which are major religious texts for Hinduism, which were written in their language, Sanskrit. Sanskrit. That's I don't think that was the native the language of the native peoples of the subcontinent. They got pushed down here to the south, the Dravidian language family, completely different languages. So they kind of got shoved down to the south. But some of them remain in the north, which is interesting, like in Pakistan. So people wonder, how did the Dravidian language get up there? Well, they didn't move, but the Aryans, this group of Indo-European speaking peoples, moved in and pushed them down. And in their religious texts, the Vedas, they refer to themselves as the Aryas, the noble ones. Aryas, we are the noble ones, as opposed to the local people, So kind of looking down on the original inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent as they migrated into this. Some say it was an older language, they say it was an invasion, but a lot of scholars say it was a migration. It wasn't really like a conquest, because these groups moved down and eventually took over and overwhelmed the original groups. But in their language, they call themselves the Arya, the noble ones, hence Aryan. Now, how do we get to like white Germans and Nazis and fascism and World War II and the Holocaust and all that stuff? How do we get there from this? Okay. Well, we can thank our friend. Well, I shouldn't say thank him because he never thought of this, that it would come to this. Friedrich Max Mueller. Remember the father of religious studies, Friedrich Max Mueller, who was a linguist and noticed Sanskrit. He was an expert in the Sanskrit language and noticed these linguistic connections and stuff like that. Okay. Let me find here in my notes where I have him. Did I write down about him? That's Witzel, but I'm not interested in that. Yeah. From his study of Sanskrit, he noticed the connection between certain languages from Europe all the way to India and not to the local languages of India that I mentioned in the south, the Dravidian, they're called the Dravidian languages, which a lot of scholars think were probably the original languages there, Dravidian. So Mueller knew this or recognized this. And so he theorized that, the language must have come from outside. It must have come, people must have moved down into India. And other people picked up on that insight and thought that, how did they get to that? Did I write that down? Well, other scholars picked up this insight from Mueller of this migration of people speaking this different language and somehow contorted it into a racial element, that the Aryans were noble because they were lighter skinned. Doesn't mean they were whites, like German white or Scandinavian white, or me white, whatever. They were just darker skin, or excuse me, they were lighter skin. The Dravidians were blacker, were darker than in skin color than the Aryans were. This group coming in, okay, and that was seen as better. Europeans took this and assumed that it must mean they were actually white Europeans and probably of Germanic stock. The Germanic peoples, Germans, Austrians, German Swiss, other groups, Scandinavian, stuff like that, who have a Germanic background, that they probably looked like them. Well, Mueller never said that. He was focusing on language, okay? So his view kind of got distorted big time. And even saying that they were lighter skinned didn't mean that they were like lighter skinned white. It just meant they had been brown and the other people were black. But anyways, but it got distorted into that. The Aryans were of Germanic heritage, or the Germans were of the Aryan heritage. They're the ones that brought the language and the culture to India. Whites brought it to the blacks. That's a pretty explosive idea. And so, yeah, with the National Socialist Workers Party, which we call what Nazis for short. Nazis is like an acronym, which Adolf Hitler became the head of. I mean, he wasn't the only head of the party, but yeah, a lot of the ideology of the members of that party was this ideology. And so, yeah, they sent German archaeologists down to India to excavate and look for stuff, and very fascinated by, northern India and finding what they thought were their roots. So, I mean, the swastika, which is one of our questions. I mean, if you go to India, you'll see the swastika all over the place. It's all over the place. On stores, on houses, all over the place. It's because it's a good luck symbol. Nothing evil about it. Okay. Where did the Nazis get it from as one of their emblems? Well, India, because they thought they were the Aryans. That was their ancestors. So they used it as a symbol for them. Okay, in their ideology. Okay. We now know, I mean, from genetic studies and stuff like that, that, the Aryans, if they existed, this is still a theory, okay? There are genetic studies that do seem to support that some kind of movement of other peoples into northern India, that, it's not all one homogeneous group. So that seems to support that there was the theory of a migration. Nevertheless, it's still a theory, could be disproved if we find other evidence. I think that I don't think that they found, I haven't come across when I've been looking, try to look stuff up for this, anything that proves that, the Germans, yeah, they're the ancient Germans. The Aryans are the ancient Germans. Doesn't seem to be a genetic connection. But genetic studies done like in the past 5 or 6 years, like 2019, I believe it was, did show a genetic connection right here, where it was first proposed from language study, but first proposed, southern Russia. Okay, there seems to be a connection, some connection between northern Indians and people from the southern steppes of modern day Russia. All right. I'll pass from this. Don't worry about this. Yes, Buddhism, Jainism. Yes. Well, maybe do I want to talk about that? No. Okay, all right. Well, maybe I should talk about this. Well, I have to because it ties into the other religions when we get to them. Just very briefly is Wombold. I won't focus. I don't do a deep dive. The classical period, 500 BC to 1000 AD. Okay, Hinduism, the religion itself, is moving along. Okay, but you have protest movements. I think I mentioned Jainism before. There's an ashram, a temple, a Jain temple up in my neck of the woods in northern New Jersey. And I'm sure you've heard of Buddhism. These religions, two religions, scholars think actually came out as protest movements against Hinduism, the common Hinduism. Okay, that the religion wasn't answering the question. Well, yeah, it wasn't answering the questions or fulfilling the needs that some people thought that it should. It was so ritualistic, so focused on performing sacrifices and proper worship of the gods and goddesses in the temples and the demons and demonesses. But it wasn't addressing like some of the main questions that people might have had, which is, how do you liberate yourself from endless death and rebirth? Is there a way to achieve ultimate, complete ceasing of any coming back? Okay? And there were traditional solutions to that question. It's not like no one had ever asked the question before. Practice yoga, extensive meditation, stuff like that. Do good works, do good actions that build up good karma that will lead you out of the cycle and not burden yourself with bad karma. But actually, good karma can bring you back as well. So you actually want no karma. But anyways, et cetera and so forth. So there were solutions. But in the case of both Jainism and Buddhism, they didn't work for those people. The Buddha, the man, the enlightened, called the enlightened one, the awakened one, the Buddha, this man that we'll talk about later at the end of the course, he tried these things. They just didn't work. They didn't achieve what he was looking for. And he finally found the solution. And so he founds his own community of followers. He preaches his message for the way to finally end all desire, all suffering. And really the way to do that is to end all desire, good or bad, for good things or for bad things. Just completely cease all craving or desire. And then you just kind of disappear into nothingness. Because everything is nothing in the Buddha's mind. Everything is really not, you're not a whole from your mind to your body. You're just parts of different stuff, which are parts of different things. Just as you break them down and go further, like peeling an onion, what do you arrive with? Nothing. Nothing there. So he was actually onto quantum physics before quantum physicists were. And he did it without any tools. He just did it with his brain. He's a genius, I think. Religious genius. But anyways. I don't agree with his view of the world. But he had something because he attracted people. Jainism is another little religion I'm not going to talk about, but I've talked about a little bit. It's also from this time period. And actually, Jainism and Buddhism seem to have been in competition. The Buddhists did not like the Jain monks, and the Jain monks didn't like the Buddhists because their solutions were different. The Jains were, well, how would you say the Jains? Well, they just had different followers. They had different views of, they didn't. I don't think they went with the Buddha's view of nothingness, that there was nothingness, but their view is really the problem is karma. That karma actions create kind of a dust, a supernatural dust, you might say. Okay, good or bad. Bad karma is kind of like mud, and good karma is kind of like what's good dust? Let's say cocaine, right? Like sugar, all right? Because everyone likes sugar sweet, so sprinkling sugar on yourself, ooh, it tastes good, whatever. Yeah, it's like karma actions put particulate matter on your body, and bad karma is heavier than good karma, so it weighs you down. It's what keeps you from not leaving the cycle of death and rebirth. If you get enough good karma, light karma, or you get no karma, then there's nothing to hold down your jiva, your spirit, from leaving, from floating up to the top of the cosmos where nirvana is. So just a solution or idea of what was happening was different. But nevertheless, you have all sorts of debates between the Jain monks and the Buddhist monks, etc., etc. And they're founded by different people. Jainism comes to this guy, Vardhamana. Actually, he's one of many, many teachers in a long line. The Buddha is just singular. There's one Buddha in an age. So this man, Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha. Okay. They both agree on certain points like ahimsa, which is non-injury. And the Jains also, that's another thing that kind of differentiates them from Buddhists, because they're even more non-injurious than even Buddhists will be. A true Buddhist, he doesn't take a life, even an animal life. But for the Jains, since everything has a spirit, you don't even take a plant life. You don't want to step on grass, or an insect. You don't want to suck it into your mouth and eat it by accident. So Jains will sweep. They'll have Jain monks and nuns will have big brooms and sweep the street before them, and also wear masks on their faces. They were all COVID conscious before we were COVID crazy, right? And so they don't suck in some insect or something. The non-injury, because again, bad karma. Bad karma. All right. So you have these protest movements. Then you have, what did I say? That's it. Then you have Islam. Here come the Muslims, baby. Oh, yes. And God bless them for that, because, you really wouldn't have Indian food, not the same, without the Muslims. Because Hinduism by nature is vegetarian. It has that strong nonviolence. So You know, that's why Indian food, if you're a vegetarian, you really want Indian food. It's delicious vegetarian food. They know that because they've been doing it for millennia. But the Muslims, of course, make meat. You know, they had no problem with eating meat. And then Europeans, of course, Portuguese, English, the British, which brought in New World stuff, tomatoes, all sorts of stuff that they didn't have in India, but they threw it into the pot, you know, into the curries and stuff, you know. So now you have a tomato-based curry because the British brought it with them from us. Their New World colonies brought it to India. The Muslims, yes. So in the medieval period, the 1200s, you start having this religion of Islam push over from Iran and push into northern Europe. And actually, as you can see from this map, establish an empire over much of the Indian subcontinent. But it waxed and waned. It grew and it got smaller, okay? The first one, the Mamluk dynasty in the 1200s, okay, this is a big, long river, the Ganges, very famous and sacred river. So there's a Mamluk empire, followed later by another larger empire, then another one, and then it gets a little smaller in that period. Cows! Why are cows? Why are cows interesting for this? This is when the veneration of cows comes, because I said that Muslims eat meat. There's a strong vegetarian streak, non-violence, living things. Don't kill them. In Hinduism, but there was not amongst the Muslims. They ate lamb, goat, cow. Eat it, baby. Allah gave it to us for food. Yeah, it's permissible as long as you prepare it, you know, the correct way, halal. You follow the halal rules and prepare it just like Jews have kosher rules. But yeah, well, as a this is where the whole thing with Indians and cows comes in. If anyone knows anything about Hinduism, like, oh yeah, don't they worship cows? You know, they're like, let the cows walk down the streets of the city and traffic stops. And, you know, they worship cows. Well, yes and no. Yes, that's true that they do. Cows are extremely highly venerated in India. And they can basically go wherever they want to go. So yeah, I'm not going to say, you know, in New Delhi, if a cow is walking down the highway, the traffic doesn't stop. You will not run into it. Want to. That'd be horrible karma. But it was a reaction against Islam. It didn't develop naturally in Hinduism. It was their reaction against this foreign religion that was, you know, trying to impose itself, you know, take people away from Hinduism, which the Muslims saw as idolatry, and to worship the one God of Islam and follow the Prophet Muhammad. And so, you know, what do? Well, you try to, you know, be opposite to the other group, right? If they do this, then you do that. So they ate the meat of animals like cows. While you're Hindu, you won't do that. In fact, you'll worship the cow. So cows become important during this period in Hinduism. Whereas before, they weren't really as much important to the Hindu faith. Okay? And Buddhism dies out. Buddhism, you can thank that mainly for the Muslims. Buddhism used to, it came out of India, but it basically died out, and especially with the Muslim invasions. The invaders killed some Buddhist monks along the way. That kind of pooped out. But Buddhism flourished outside of India. And the only place that Buddhism still exists on the Indian subcontinent, other than India, is in Sri Lanka. This country down here, which is called Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Wait. No, I won't tell them that. Thinking I should tell you what Sri Lanka means, but I won't tell you that. But Buddhism survives only there. It died out in the rest of the continent from Hinduism's efforts, opposition, but mainly from some of the not so peaceful efforts of the Muslim invaders. Okay. Not going to worry about the colonialism with the British Raj, only because, Well, it could connect up with Christianity, but it doesn't. The colonization of India, I'm not going to worry about that. I'll get to the scriptures. Sacred writings. There were no sacred writings at first. Okay? Anyone who's taken Encountering Sacred Writings should know with me in the history of humanity, orality, speaking, was the preferred method of passing on information, not writing things down. And Hinduism, as an ancient human artifact, is no different. Sacred writings come later, okay? The revelation of the universe, the Sanatana Dharma, was given orally and passed on orally. I mean, to the great wise men. I'm sure there were wise women as well, but the main figures were male. So the great wise men. It wasn't even really a revelation in a sense. It was more like they heard a sound, like bing. It's kind of described as this rishi is the word that's used for these ancient wise men and sages. The rishis just heard the sound of the universe. The universe had a particular sound, and they were tuned into it. And then they orally passed on their understanding of it to their students. And that's how it should be. That's how it really should be done. I mean, any of you who've done yoga and whatever, and you have a guru, yes, or a gurini. I think it's a female gurini. But anyways, a guru is up. The guru sits there in front of the students, sit around the guru, and the guru just talks to them. He doesn't give them books or say, hey, I'll give you some readings and then we'll talk about that. Readings aren't involved. Okay, that's the true way to pass on the teaching. And that's how Hindu religion was passed on. What eventually got written down as their sacred scriptures. These were all learned by memory, singing them. You would the guru would sing them to his students, and that's how you learn them. But as things became more complicated, harder to memorize, writings develop. And I wonder if it's also not just contact with like the Western world, the Muslims and then Europeans. Okay, because Europeans started just translating all sorts of Hindu writings. You didn't even teach them to outsiders. Okay, the sacred writings of Hinduism were only taught by Hindus to Hindus, and males at that. You didn't teach Hindu women at all the sacred writings. They were taught to male Hindus, especially upper caste. So again, there's that distinction. If you're a lower caste person, like the lowest caste, they won't teach you. You would not be taught the sacred writings at all because you were considered unworthy of them. So, anyways, they eventually are written down, probably by, I think, Europeans, the influence of Europeans. And so they become more accessible, but also was hard to memorize. And I have a video, I guess I'll end here. I have it, I'll show it. I think I'll try to track it down on my computer and show it in the next class. A little documentary where they're showing, even today, a school where the little boy studying for the priesthood, and when I say priesthood, don't think of it like Christian priesthood. It's the caste, your group that you're in. If you're born into it, it has nothing to do with like celibacy or being ordained by a bishop, and it shows them learning how to learn, or maybe it's an article, but I thought it was a video. I'll get it, track it. God bless you all. See you on Thursday. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You're welcome, miss. Have a good day.